Well, thank you everyone for being here. We're going to pick up where we left off. Was that could that be 3 weeks ago already?
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy.
Can you give me a page or a book or a...
Yes, first Samuel. Oh, it's
Have a page number?
17,
1 Samuel
page
17.
306.
Oh.
306?
Yeah. So we're looking at the story of David and Goliath. So I don't know, this will be a short lesson today because we did half of it last time. So we're just going to hopefully try to finish it today. But we looked at this idea of giants, and we talked about the possibility of him being a giant and how much his armor weighed and all that kind of stuff. He was a very formidable foe. And the contrast between him and David, the youngest son of Jesse. All right, and so in chapter 17, verse 16, for 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. What's significant about the number 40? Besides the fact that he probably went out there every day for 40 days, that's what it was. But why did the author mention that? Why is that significant? What's the big deal about 40? Yeah, Lent is 40 days, but why do we do
40 years.
40 years.
40 years is a...
Desert.
40 years in the wilderness, right, represented a generation.
40 days and 40 nights rain.
40 days, 40 nights rain. Jesus in the wilderness, 40 days. So that 40 becomes symbolic then of a generation, because they were gone in the wilderness for a generation. So it's kind of like saying for Goliath to be out there for 40 days is like saying there was nobody for a whole period of time, nobody out of that generation that could face him. It just kind of helps to emphasize the idea that there was no one that could stand up to him. So every day he's out there threatening, and the Israelites were terrified. Okay, now we pick up verse 17. And so Jesse said to David his son, "Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them." So that's kind of nice of him, isn't it? I wonder back in those days how much, when I was in the Navy paid for everything I used, right? They never said to me, you need to pay for yourself. But how much soldiers may have been expected to their families had to cover their costs, or sometimes if they conquered area, I'm sure they just ravaged what was there. They took whatever they could find. So here's Jesse trying to provide for his sons while they're at war. Verse 19, now Saul and they and all the men, they meaning the brothers, and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper. But I think we mentioned this last time. We don't know where, I got the wrong map up there anyways. We're not quite sure where this was, but there's lots of valleys there. So you can picture the setting, right? The Philistines are on one side, the Israelites are on the other side, and if you're fighting a war, what do you want?
Higher.
The high ground. So Goliath comes down into the valley and challenges them, but the Philistines still aren't going to come up on the Israelite side, or vice versa. So it's kind of a stalemate there. Verse 20, and David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, took the provisions, and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. So you can almost imagine, there's no fighting going on, because nobody wants to go fight Goliath, but they stand on each side of the valley and they're shouting at each other, right? Ah! A lot of wind and smoke, but nothing going on. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name. So I'm pretty sure Goliath was mentioned earlier in verse 4, but now this is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the last time where his name is mentioned. So his name drops out of the picture. That's significant too. He came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. Well, let's just review. What were the words that he was saying? What was he yelling to the Israelites? Go back to verse 10. I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. So he's putting them down, right? He's shaming them. Verse 24. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. So if somebody's willing to fight Goliath and beat him, what would the king do for him? That's what everybody's talking about. Well, he would give him a ton of money, he'd make him rich, and yeah, he would give him his daughter, so he gets married into the royal family. And his
Got a question. Why couldn't like 100 Israelites take this guy? Just go rush him.
that's interesting. I suppose
That
you
wouldn't be
could
a
try
good
that.
story anymore.
Yeah, but I mean, if you got 100 coming down the valley, then 100 the Philistines
The
are going to
bay
come
back
down
off.
the valley too.
Yeah, okay.
You can be the first one.
I'll shut up now. Science.
And also that his father's house will be free in Israel. What does that mean? His father's house.
No taxes?
No taxes, right.
Ah.
So his father's house now never has to pay taxes ever again. So that's kind of a big deal. And so verse 26, David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? So how are they viewing him? Because he's defying them. He's a reproach. That's how they see him. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? How is he viewing them? When he's defying the ranks of Israel, who's he defying?
God.
The army of the living God. I have thought about that many times, because I think that's true for you too. How many of you have ever suffered some kind of injustice? Somebody did something bad to you, or worked against you, or was unfair to you in a serious way. That's not just what they did to you. They did that to a child of God. Do you think your Father doesn't take that seriously in heaven? That he doesn't sit up there and take account that someone has wronged one of his children? Those people that might be all arrogant and proud of themselves, for what they did, but they're facing some serious retribution if they don't repent of their sins, right? God takes that very seriously. Verse 27, and the people answered him in the same way, meaning they gave him the answer that we just read. So shall it be done to the man who kills him. Verse 28, now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard him as he spoke to the men. So you can picture this, David's up there. Now David's a young man, he's not a boy here at this point. He's already old, but his three oldest brothers, what were there? There were 8 brothers total, right? So the age of service must have been a little bit higher than what we're used to. But you could picture him getting all excited about battle and fighting, and Eliab's more serious. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you come down to see the battle. And so David's being accused of just wanting to be in all the kind of the fun stuff, right? See the fighting going on. And David said, what have I done now? I mean, you can just picture this. If you had brothers, this could be in your family too, right? And he turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again as before. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail him because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. So David's going around, he's talking to all these people like, hey, what will Saul do for the guy that fights him? And pretty soon the word comes up to Saul, hey, there's this guy that just keeps asking about fighting Goliath. And so Saul sends for him and brings David in. And David says, your servant, meaning himself, David, he's willing to go and fight. Why would Saul maybe be willing to do that?
He had nobody else jumping up to do it.
Yeah, and he's got nothing to lose, right? If he goes down and gets killed, I mean, that's not a good thing, but they still hold the high ground on their side of the valley. Yeah, it's just, right.
Yeah, and again, nobody else was
No one else is
jumping
willing to
in,
do it,
so,
right?
yeah,
Verse
let's do
33. Saul said to David, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, from the paw of the bear, will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. So Saul said, you can't fight, you're too young, you're not going to be, this guy's been fighting for a long, long time, he's a man of war, you're not going to be able to do anything. David says, no, I watch the sheep, and the sheep get attacked by lions and bears, and I go and rescue the little sheep, and if I have to, how does he fight them? With his sling?
With staff, maybe?
Yeah,
With
probably.
a sword or a knife, because he gets in close, right? He grabs him by the beard.
Yeah.
So he's getting in close and stabbing him. Can you picture yourself getting in a fight with a bear or a lion? Getting close enough in that you're going to grab him and stab him?
A lot of people can't do it with a gun.
Yeah, right. It's interesting too. When you think of lions now and bears, where are lions? Besides, don't say the zoo. If you say yeah, they're in really a small area of
And
Africa.
are there
is in their
bears
range.
in Israel?
But there were back in that day, and bears. There are bears today, way further north, like in southern Russia.
Chicago.
I think there are bears. Yeah,
I had to go there.
I think there are bears in a few places in Europe.
Yeah, Russia has.
Of course, we have bears in North America. There are different kinds of bears in Asia. But back in those days, we know that they had a much extended range. Lions covered the whole Middle East. There were lions in Israel and lions in all those areas, Syria. And the lions were really hunted to extinction during the time of the Assyrians. So about 300 years after what we're reading here, when the Assyrians were in charge. The Assyrians, their symbol of strength was a lion. On all their big buildings and stuff, they have reliefs of lions. And so that was a big deal for them to hunt lions. And so one of their kings advertises how he went out and he killed 700 lions. Well, you can't be killing 700 lions without the lions running out pretty soon. And so the lions were pretty much made extinct throughout Asia and southern Europe by the time of the Assyrians. There may have been a few further north in wild areas, but they were pretty much gone. They disappeared. There were leopards in that area too. There were leopards still when I went to Israel in 1992, and my mom told me that there were still leopards near En-Gedi, near the Dead Sea. But it's the same kind of thing. Their range is reduced. When people see them, what do? They kill them. So the last leopard was seen about 1994, I think. I think there's no leopards there anymore today. There were bears, we know, throughout that whole range, but the bears are pretty much gone. But in those days, there were all those different wild animals. Do you remember when they were going to go into the promised land? And God said, I'm not going to wipe out all the Canaanite nations all at once, because the wild animals in the land would be too much for you. In other words, if there's no other people living there, the wild would be so ferocious they wouldn't be able to live, and they would be taken over. So the Canaanites would gradually be removed. That was God's plan, so that the wild animals wouldn't overpower the Israelites. So if there's that many wild animals that you can't move your whole country in there without threat of getting a lot of people killed, there must have been a lot of wild animals.
Yeah.
And so David had all these fights, and he, as I said, he gets in close enough to grab them and stab them. So where's David's confidence coming from?
God.
The Lord.
Experience.
He has faith in the Lord. And faith from experience. The experiences he's had were things that God used to prepare him for this big fight that he was going to have later. Can you see that in your life, when you look over your life, where you had battles, you had fights you had to go through, things you had to combat spiritually, things that were struggles and difficult for you, but they were God preparing you, getting you ready, building your confidence and your faith in Him for some bigger battle that you were going to face later. That seems to be how the Lord is working here. Pick up at verse 38. Then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor. And he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. Okay, so they put the armor on him. Who were the only ones who had armor in the Israelite army? We heard this in an earlier portion. Does anyone remember? Only Saul and his sons had a sword, because the Philistines had gotten rid of all the blacksmiths, so they couldn't produce weapons. What does the Israelite army have?
Yeah, what did they have?
Probably staffs and pitchforks and homemade hatchets and whatever they've got, but actual weapons of war like swords and stuff, Saul and his sons were the only ones that had them.
And they didn't even go down to battle, probably.
Right. Well, they fought. Saul's sons were very brave, but they put this armor on, she got herself in a spot there. Oh, how do you get yourself in a spot like that? Oh. Hey, then her daddy came and saved her. That's good.
To the rescue.
Yes. Every child should know that their daddy will save them when they need help. That's important. So they try this stuff on David, and David's not used to fighting with all that weight and that armor and all of that heavy stuff on him. So he says, I can't do this. So instead he's got a staff, and he goes to the brook and he chooses 5 smooth stones. Why did he choose 5 smooth stones?
Because they come out of the sling better than a jagged one.
The smooth stones, that's why they're smooth stones,
Right.
because they'll come out of the sling better,
Right.
that's for sure. And you're gonna find smooth stones in a brook,
Sure.
not on the side of the mountain. Why did he choose 5?
Oh,
Just in case one didn't work?
In case one didn't work. Yeah, the answer is, I think, we don't know. But it's interesting that the application people take from this, one of the old ways that the commentators used to look at this was, it was 5 because of the 5 books of Moses. So he was equipping himself with the word of God. Yeah, maybe, that's kind of like silly place, you gotta stretch a little bit to get at that, I don't know if that's true or not. So I don't know why, if we know why he took 5. Yeah, it's interesting to think, did he not have faith, did he think he might need some extra shots? Yeah, I don't know. But still, you can't fault his bravery, he's gonna go fight. It's verse 41, the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. So remember the Philistine, his big heavy armor that he's got, so the guy that's carrying his shield is actually walking in front of him, so he's not holding his own shield. Remember, he's got the spear, but he also has javelins, and so he's carrying a lot of stuff, so he has to have someone else carry his shield. 42, and when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you have come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Now, that's big, right?
mm-hmm.
Because what's being set up here? What's this? The whole framework of this battle? Yes, like a spiritual battle of their God. Dagon was the principal Philistine god.
Probably associated with Satan.
Yeah, I don't know if they. I think all the false gods, there's a connection to Satan. You could make that case from Corinthians. But their God against Israel's God. That was a common way to look at battle. Has anyone ever read the Iliad, the story of the Trojan War? So you know the Trojan War, when you read it, it's not just, it's talking about Achilles and Hector and they're fighting, but behind the scenes, they keep Homer keeps flashing to these pictures of the gods, because the gods were at war, right? Poseidon was helping the Greeks, because they had the navy, right? They were water people. Apollo was helping the Trojans, because they worshipped Apollo. And there were different gods. The gods were kind of lined up against each other, helping their warriors fight each other in this big battle. And that was how people viewed battles in those days. It's not just our army against your army, it's our gods against your gods. And whichever team wins, that's proof that their gods are the higher gods. Their gods are the better gods. So there's spiritual warfare implicit in this thing. So he's cursing David by his gods. Verse 44, the Philistine said to David, come to me and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. And then David said to the Philistines, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. So David is very conscious of the fact that he is representing God here, and he's building up the name of the Lord. He's the God, the Lord of hosts. Verse 46, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. So it's unmistakably clear here to David that this is a spiritual battle, that he's representing the Lord, and the Lord is directing the outcome. Now this is what I wanted to make sure I get at before our time runs out. How do most people culturally construe the story of David and Goliath? It's the stereotypical underdog story, right? It's the little guy against the big guy. Yeah, and so it's the underdog that no one expects to win, but he finds a way and he comes back and he wins, and we all want to root for the little, the little business that's going up against a big business that's trying to crush them, or the little guy in the football team who makes the team against all the big bullies and gets the star play at the end of the year or something. We all want to root for the little guy. Okay, but is that the way the story is being presented? Is it? No, it's not being primarily construed as the underdog story. It's being construed as, you can't defy the Lord of hosts. You can't go against the God of Israel. This is the Lord, and this is his army, and this is his chosen person. And those that go against him are going to face defeat, because the battle belongs to him. The Lord is the one that's at stake here. So we come to, we get the end of the story, verse 48. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell on his face to the ground. Now, if you've ever seen like a slinger, those stones fly out of there. They're very dangerous. It's very dangerous. In some of the riots that the Palestinians have had with the Israelites, the people will come on the news and they'll say, the Israelites, they're the Jews, they have guns and they have rubber bullets and they have tear gas, and all the poor Palestinians have is stones. They're just throwing stones. But you know what? You see one of those stones flying out of that sling, I don't know how fast they go, but if you get hit by one of those things, it's not like somebody chucking a stone at you. This is really dangerous. So it hits.
I gotta ask you, how? I suppose you wouldn't know. How do you aim? Because how do you know it isn't going to fly out wherever?
But with practice,
you have to go one side, right?
Yeah, no, with practice you can do it. So as you're swinging it, you let go of one side at just the right point, and it opens up. Later on in the book of Judges, do you remember they had the Benjamites who had left-handed slingers, and they were highly prized. You know why? Because when you go to war, you've got your shield in your left hand and your spear or your sword in your right hand. So if they're throwing right-handed, it's like a curveball in a baseball game, right? The stone is coming this way, bing, off the shield. But the Benjamites were throwing curves in this way, right? So the left-handed Benjamite slingers were highly prized in battle.
It sounds just like a baseball team.
Just like, yeah.
The
Benjamite slingers. So it sinks into his forehead and he falls down on his face. 50. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone. and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and cut it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now they could have just held the high ground, but what happens when they see something like that?
No.
You got a 9-foot tall guy getting killed, and you're scared, so they start running. Verse 52, and the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath. I showed that to you on the map before. That was one of the main Philistine cities. And the gates of Ekron, another one of their main cities, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Sha'araim as far as Gath and Ekron. And the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. So that was actually in ancient battles. That's what they say most of the casualties. Ancient battles were like giant shoving matches. You would rush forward and they would back up a little bit, and then they'd get their courage and they'd rush forward and you'd back up a little bit, and you're throwing spears and you're throwing rocks, and it's like a giant shoving match until something causes one army to run away. Either they get flanked or they get outnumbered so much or something goes wrong, and once they turn and run, that's when 90% of the casualties would happen. So we know that's what happens here to the Philistines. They're getting slaughtered all the way back to their homeland. And so David brings back, he keeps Goliath's armor as a war prize, and the Israelites plunder the Philistine camp. So it's a great battle. And so I wanted to make that point, though, that this battle is not a battle between the underdog and the giant. This is a battle between the Lord and what he's doing and those that were defying the Lord. And so keep that in mind in your own lives too. When you have battles, things that you have to face or struggle with, challenges that confront you in your life, and enemies that oppose you, the battle is the Lord's. The Lord is the one that oversees what's going on. All right, thanks everybody. We'll continue with more from the life of David next week.